everyone, and welcome to Pop Crime TV's The Outlier podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Conlin, and today we are joined by a guest whose name is forever tied to one of the most infamous trials in American history. Tommy Pope is a veteran litigator with over 30 years of experience, and he served as the lead prosecutor in the 1995 trial of Susan Smith, the then 22-year-old mother from South Carolina who shocked the world when she confessed to the drowning deaths of her two young children, Michael and Alex. Smith originally claimed that she had been carjacked by a black man, but later confessed to strapping her then 3-year-old, so hard to say, and 14-month-old in their car seats, pushing her car into a lake, causing her own little babies to drown. Now, Tommy's skillful handling of this case not only brought justice to Alex and Michael Smith, but it cemented his reputation as one of the nation's most respected attorneys and beyond. But Tommy's career is far more than just one trial. He's a native of Rock Hill, South Carolina, and he's the son of a sheriff and a school teacher. And his dedication to public service was instilled at an early age, from his time as an agent for the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division to his tenure as solicitor for the 16th Circuit. Tommy's commitment to justice has remained steadfast. So today, he's a senior partner at Elrod Pope Accident and Injury Attorneys, and he continues to advocate for those in need. He's also, let me just add this, he's a public servant serving in the South Carolina House of Representatives as the Speaker pro tempore. But today, Tommy is joining me because Susan Smith, after 30 years in prison, has a parole hearing tomorrow, November 20th. And I'm shocked. I am furious. I'm shocked, but I'm going to bring in Tommy right now. Hi, Tommy.
Hey, Lauren, how you doing?
I'm okay. I'm a little disturbed by everything. I know that in certain states, life without parole means that you are eligible for parole after 30 years, which, I mean, I feel like there should be a big disclaimer in the courtroom when it comes to this stuff. Yeah, but first, can we just go back to the beginning? Could you just take me back to 1995? What were your initial thoughts and emotions as a prosecutor when you first learned about this case and how Susan handled herself?
Sure. So to kind of give you by way of background, I had two counties. I was 32 years old in 94, which is actually when she committed the crime. I tried it in the summer of 95. I was 32 years old and I had two counties. York was my bigger county. That's where Rock Hill is, and right below Charlotte, North Carolina. And then Union was the smaller county. And so I was actually in trial in York County when this first occurred. And I'll be honest with you, Lauren, I really was concerned, but not overly concerned. And I'll tell you why. You know, they called them carjackers for a reason. A carjacker in the kind of their hierarchy, they'll take your car. They may take your money. They may take a female from a sexual assault standpoint. Carjackers are not taking children, you know. So normally if you have some circumstance like that, there's something domestic involved, you know, maybe between the husband and wife, a custody issue. And so I really truly thought that at the end of the day, Susan was going to have them stashed somewhere, you know, maybe with an aunt and at the beach house or something like that. So each night I was in trial in York County. I always tell people I was doing the Lord's work. I was prosecuting the preacher who had embezzled from the daycare center. So I'm trying that case every day. And then at night I'm getting a call from the SLED agents who are investigating it. And they would kind of keep me up to speed. And of course, law enforcement, as you're aware, would be doing a dual investigation. They're looking for the black man, the carjacker, but they're also looking at the family members. You've seen that in other cases, I'm sure. And so they're kind of keeping me up to speed. And then I remember the night I had finished the trial in York, I got a call from the agents that said that she admitted that there wasn't a carjacker, that she had killed the kids. So I load up and go down to Union to John D. Long Lake. And, you know, in my career, I'd seen a number of crime scenes, and I felt the need to be there, really even transcending the case because of all the media attention. She spent 9 days begging the public, begging people to find her children, the carjacker to return her children. And so I knew from the media intensity, it was, I mean, I've tried a number of death penalty cases, even before this, but I knew it was going to be intense. And so I saw those kids come out of that lake. The wrecker pulled the car out. The boys are strapped in their car seats in the back. Of course, had been underwater for 9 days, but that's etched in my mind. But I put it there intentionally so that when the going got tough, and it did, going forward with the pressure, that that I remembered, why the people put me there to do what I do.
Oh my gosh, I got chills. I sometimes forget that part, that the prosecutor most of the time is there for autopsies, for recovery, for the crime scene. And that is a lot of the time what drives you. That's pretty incredible. Really. And now you sought the death penalty. And I've heard you give interviews where you're not this big death penalty guy, meaning that you think that's the price that somebody should pay. It's just, this is what fits the crime. Now, do you think that because the jury was mainly men, this is why she did not receive the death penalty?
I think it's a combination of factors. After 30 years, I tell people, I'm now a lay psychiatrist. I'm a jury expert. I'm all these things just because I'm thinking about it and talking about it all the time. I'm obviously saying that tongue in cheek, but I think there were a combination of factors. I want to give credit where credit's due to the defense. And going back even before that, I sought the death penalty because I think justice has to be blind. And if the black man with the toboggan, the alleged carjacker, had actually committed this crime, they would have run me out of town if I didn't seek the death penalty. Likewise, if David Smith, the father, had committed the crime, most likely the same scenario. So I felt strongly that Susan needed to face the same punishment. And like I said, you making your point about the death penalty, if our strongest punishment had been life in prison or 30 years or whatever it be, whatever the strongest punishment was, that's what she deserved. I think going to your jury makeup, a couple things, and again, I give the defense credit. We did not have a change of venue. So we drew the jury from the small town, small community of Union, South Carolina, a place where I'm going to see your mother tomorrow. If I give you the death penalty, I'm going to see her at the grocery store. Everybody sees everybody. I think that was a factor. I think the awkward thing about Susan is that if the carjacker gets our children, somehow mentally we know there's bad in the world and we know we can prepare for that. If the dad does it, I hate to say it, but people, if it came down to my kids between Tommy and Kim, they're going to think Tommy would be the perpetrator, but I hate to say it, and whether that's stereotypical, it is unsettling when it's the mother. And I always use the example, I'd go off to trial and my oldest son, would be there with his mother. And I wasn't worried that he's not going to be okay. So I think it's unsettling. I think people want to attribute some type of shocking mental health aspect to it because I've got to do something that helps me feel comfortable. It's not going to happen at my house. So that's kind of one part of it. Ultimately, and it goes really to your lead in, afterwards, the jurors said that they felt that if she got the life sentence, and they, by the way, as you indicated, life did not mean life then in 95. The law actually changed in 96 and life did mean life, but the jury was not told that. The jury was told, you take life, and that was the case law. I'm not blaming anybody, but you take life and death in its plain and usual meaning. So I remember some jurors speaking afterwards, and they said that they thought that would be the best punishment. She'd be remorseful. She'd think what she did to Michael and Alex. The fallacy there, of course, is that one, life didn't mean life. Two, she's having sex with guards. She's had her Facebook friends or whatever it is she's done. She's had sugar daddies wanting to take care of her. And so I think the jury, did that thinking they were giving the right punishment. And finally, I think Union as a town was weary of the whole thing, and not that the average layperson knows this, but you get a death penalty, you're probably going to try it 2 or 3 times because of technicalities and getting it overturned. And I
Yeah.
think Union was ready to move forward, and they thought this was the opportunity. Unbeknownst to them, we'd be sitting here, you and I, speaking 30 years later.
Yeah. And going back to what you said about a mother committing an unspeakable, heinous act against her own flesh and blood, her children, I think many of us, and I would be a horrible person on a jury for a case like this, because I would try to rationalize. In my brain, I'm a mother. I would do anything for my kids. I'm like, kill me instead, whatever.
Right, right.
It's like you have to factor in probably a non-existent mental health issue, because that's the only way we can justify it. And so,
I think
yeah,
you're absolutely right, and I think people reach for that, and I always say as a caveat that every murder case I've tried, something's wrong. Something's wrong to make the guy break in the house and rape the 80-year-old woman and beat her to death. Something's wrong for the guy to conspire to kill his parents and make it look like a burglar. Something's wrong every time. I think the distinction I see or want to make is, in Susan's case, she made a horrible, horrible decision. But contrary to what the defense was saying, I do not believe it was a botched suicide. For your viewers, a little bit of background. She was having a relationship with the boss's son at work. Of course, she was married, but she and David were estranged, or whatever was going on with them. And he had written her like a Dear Jane letter that basically said, I'd love to be with you, but I'm just not ready for kids. Well, the truth was, he was going through, the girls in the secretarial pool. This was just a kind of coward's way out, to send that letter. So, but she took it to heart. So when we got the car at the lake, the boys were in the car. Her wedding dress was in the car. Her wedding album was in the car. The only thing that wasn't would be David Smith, the father. And so, we know from testing the vehicle took about 6 minutes to sink. And so when we were testing it and rolling it down that steep ramp, it almost knocked the sled agent over who was trying to let the brake down, to roll it into the lake to see how it did. So the fact that she was in an awful mental state, I don't dispute that. But the fact she claims to be suicidal, how do you stop a suicide for yourself and not stop it for the 2 kids in the back seat? When she got to the house that she ran to and told the story, she wasn't wet. She wasn't scraped up, like you dove out of a moving car. Again, knowing the boys floated 6 minutes, if she had gone in the water and somehow panicked, and got out, you and I may never be talking about it. You know what I mean? It would have been horrible, but it wouldn't have been intentional. She had on the sweatshirt of Tom Finley, the boyfriend, that night. She told David Smith that during that 9 days, she fully expected Tom Finley to come check on her. And ultimately I said, why don't you give the kids away? Why don't you give the kids to David? Why don't you give the kids to the aunt? So if you give your kids away, you're a bad mother. But if a carjacker takes your kids, you're a victim. And if you're a victim, Prince Charming may rush in and rescue you again. I truly believe she put that much thought into it. And again, the botched suicide thing didn't add up. And I think then you couple it with, if you look, I do a lot of time with court TV now, and unfortunately, killing children is all too frequent. For child abuse situations, different situations. I think what made hers even more heinous was the 9 days she spent begging people to help find those kids, begging the return, by the carjacker. I can remember, now people kind of Monday morning quarterback and say, I could tell she was lying. Well, the best lies are wrapped in truth. So when she says the carjacker's driving away and she hears them crying out for her, I bet she did. She had 6 minutes to hear them crying out for her as they're floating in that lake.
Tommy, that's so upsetting. And, I do feel like, I don't think she had a mental break. I don't. I feel like it's a very deliberate thing to put your wedding album and your wedding dress in the car. That is a separate step in this whole thing. I think a break happen. I mean, I'm not a doctor, clearly, but
Sure.
yeah, I don't buy that. But I feel like her admission of what she did was her way of being sorry, I guess. But look, there is no sorry. I don't care what happened to you. You don't act out on your children. I'm not saying go commit violence against somebody who wronged you or someone who molested you. Not saying that, but you don't do it to a 3-year-old and a 14-month-old who just look to you to protect them. And I mean, can you, I can't. So just fast forward. I want to get to now. You mentioned this. She's sleeping with multiple guards. She's being paid for interviews. She's got pen pals. She said, I think in 2015, she wrote this pathetic sorry ass letter saying like, no one thinks I'm sorry, but I am sorry. And every photo of her, Tommy, she's smirking or something. And I can't stand the sight of her. I don't want her to ever see outside of those prison walls because she doesn't deserve it unless she's going into a lake strapped in a car seat that she can't get out of. Okay. So that's where I'm at. But what are you planning on saying tomorrow in front of the parole board and in front of, I guess, the world pretty much?
Sure. So I'll tell you, for the most part in my career, I simply sent a letter to the parole board when these hearings would come up that said, I believe in truth in sentencing. So-and-so received such sentence and they ought to carry it out. And this is really somewhat an extension of that, but I tied into what we discussed earlier. The jury believed that she should go to prison for life. They spared her the death penalty, and they believe, that she would spend that time being remorseful for Michael and Alex, and she hadn't. She spent her time focused on Susan and what's best for Susan. She is histrionic. They call it. She's either the princess or the victim. She's self-centered, and sadly, we're all products of whatever growing up, whatever genetics, whatever made her that way. That's who she is. So for me, the real reason I'm there tomorrow is David Smith, who was the father of Michael and Alex. I give him such credit. We appeared together on Court TV a couple of weeks ago because I rarely reach out to my victims because I represent a bad time in your life. And so I don't call you. I always love when I hear from you, but I don't ever want to reach out, So, we were on and he talked about forgiveness and he talked about he had forgiven her from a Christian standpoint. But I told somebody today, I like that David's got a little bit of New Testament and a little bit of Old Testament because he has forgiven her, but he feels like that justice needs to be served for Michael and Alex, which requires her to serve the remainder of her time. And it's going to be difficult because if she's not successful tomorrow, then 2 years from now, she gets to do it all over again. And 2 years from then, she gets to do it again. So unfortunately, and it's the hand we were dealt, David and his wife, Tiffany, his family, and as long as I'm around and he needs my help, we'll be dealing with this, every 2 years from here on out.
What do you say to the people that claim she's not a threat to society? I mean, I think she is. I think she's highly manipulative. And I think that she has shown no remorse. I mean, that's two separate things, right? She can,
Sure.
I don't know, maybe she can act really well in front of these people. I hope that they are not gullible. And I don't mean any disrespect to them. It's just that I find her manipulative and she is a great liar. We all saw her lie for 9 days. So what do you say to those people that she's not a threat?
Well, and I think there's a balance and there's different factors. And one of them is certainly safety for the community. I think in this case, for me, it is more about justice being served for Michael and Alex and the sentence she received being meaningful for the crime she committed. I don't believe she's going to go get 2 more children and put them in the lake if she's out. But I don't think she has done what the jury believed justice was and found she is sorry. She's sorry she's in jail. She's sorry for Susan, not sorry for Michael and Alex.
Exactly. And let me ask you, was there ever an obstruction charge or anything in terms of her lies with the black man?
No, we never went there, obviously, because we had the maximum penalty on the table. But, that's in a strange twist. I was thinking when you were talking, she had allegations of sexual assault from her stepfather.
Yeah.
that had been charged previously before I was solicitor and then been dismissed. And somebody asked, why I didn't go back and prosecute that. And I said, well, it's not that I don't necessarily believe it happened, because my understanding is she was having sex with him like 2 weeks before she killed the kids. But the truth is, if I was defending it, I'd point to that 9 days of her lying and say, if we got sucked in by that, don't get sucked in by this story. And again, I'm not saying it did or didn't happen. I'm just saying she has absolutely no credibility.
Right, right. I was just thinking about that because that story did cause such a problem and such a divide and such just it just, it was so wrong of her. It was so wrong of her and unnecessary. And I wish we could go back in time and add a couple more charges. So maybe I don't know, would that make a difference if she would be up for parole? I don't know if it would. I have no idea. I just feel like nowadays, and I know that things have changed, but holy crap, prosecutors, they do not hold back anymore. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with Leilani Simon, who dumped her toddler in
Right.
I mean she 19 charges, and I was like, oh my, and she was convicted on all of them. So you said something that I really respect. I really respect prosecutors who have respect for the defense team and can acknowledge when they do a good job. Was there a moment in the trial, just to go back for a minute, a pivotal moment or some kind of moment where your heart kind of dropped a little bit and you were like, oh shit, oh gosh, okay, this might affect my case a little bit?
I think that it actually happened early on, and we kind of touched on it a little bit when, so that night I go to leave the lake and go where Susan is. And of course, the sheriff, a SLED agent, and an FBI agent were interrogating Susan. Ironically, Sheriff Howard Wells was Susan's godfather, going back to the It's a Small World,
Yeah.
community, right? And so I asked to see her statement. And they said she's much too upset to provide a statement. And I said, guys, I'm going to have to prosecute this thing in a few months. I need something in writing. So they gave her a legal pad because Susan was so upset. And they said, write how you were feeling. Well, that's where we got our quote confession. It was the worst day of my life. Somebody I loved didn't love me. I sunk to my lowest when I let the boys roll in the lake without me. That's not much of a confession. If the African-American guy had been in custody, you'd think they would have said, and then what did you do? And then what did you do? It made it more difficult when we're trying to figure out, like, the roll in the car in the lake. Were you in the car and you jumped out? Did you
Yeah.
stop and then roll the car in? Because even those little subtleties can make a lot of difference. If you jump out, maybe you were suicidal and you just weren't thinking clearly. If you let the car down, which is the only way we could figure out to do it, so the biggest uh-oh moment for me was I felt strongly that Susan Smith needed to be fed out of the same spoon that the carjacker would have been fed out of, or David Smith would have been fed out of. And I got some pushback even from law enforcement early on, that I shouldn't be so harsh on Susan. And that was difficult. Even when I put Howard Wells up at the beginning, because the defense's whole tactic isn't not guilty. The defense's tactic is save you from the death penalty.
Exactly.
So, Howard's testifying about things for mitigation for Susan, and it's supposed to be my witness. That was very frustrating, but you're in the middle of the river paddling, then you can't stop. So you just keep on moving.
This is the problem with small towns. This is exactly what you said. This is small town bullshit. Excuse my language. Like I'm sorry. I hate when this happens. It doesn't feel right. And I know that it's difficult and it's easier said than done, but I just really always feel like there should be a venue change regardless, because it's right. I mean, I don't know the details. Did you try for that?
No. So here's the trap. I'm elected by the people of Union County. I have to go in court and say, I don't think the people who elected me could be fair and impartial. It's kind of like a little bit of political suicide. But even to go back to the sheriff issue, so I go down and I said, I need to meet the family, because unlike the federal prosecutors where they're kind of working with law enforcement from the beginning, I was kept apprised, but now it's kind of in my lap. An arrest has been made. It's now in my lap. I told the sheriff I want to go see the family. And obviously I'm particularly thinking about David Smith, the father of Michael and Alex. The sheriff takes me over to this house, and the first person I see in their yard was Bev Russell, who's Susan Smith's stepfather. Well, I didn't make the connection. I'd known Bev Russell, in Union before, and I go, "Do you know the family?" And he said, "Susan's my stepdaughter." And suddenly I realized he has taken me to the mother's house, the brother's house, the family's house when I'm trying to see David Smith. So the sheriff goes in, and I have to go. I'm the guy that's probably going to seek death penalty against your daughter. So obviously that was very awkward. So then I say, "Howard, I want to go see David Smith." He takes me over to an apartment wherever David was living and points up to the apartment and says he lives up there. Sheriff didn't even go with me then. So you talk about kind of the cliquiness of a small town.
Yeah.
He was on the Susan side, and so poor David was kind of, it was me and David. I say it that way. Obviously, I had my office and the support, but and when David testified, I always say that's why I wish cameras were in the courtroom, because it was excruciating when David testified. But anybody that would have heard David Smith would have known why we were trying that case.
Oh, I wish I could see that. Oh my gosh. And you mentioned the confession or the note that she had to write on legal pad, and I don't know if this is exact, but you mentioned that at first her explanation was she was upset about this man, and then it seems like buried in the middle, she decides to mention her two boys that she killed, which, guys, this is so infuriating. That right there alone, it means that they are not at the forefront of your mind. You don't even give a crap about them. They're dead, and it's buried in the middle of this your love letter. I mean, that is disgusting, and that right there shows me that you're sane, you're sound of mind, you're just evil. You are the devil.
No, yeah, you're right. It was almost like that part was a throwaway, because it was really, they said, "Susan, tell us how you're feeling." Well, she darn sure did. And it was a clear picture of how she had been victimized, by not having the love of the rich guy or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
It was never about Michael and Alex. But, that part was made the prosecution more difficult. It was more frustrating. Normally, you and law enforcement are all, paddling in the same direction. It was difficult.
Yeah, I mean, that right there is like, guys, when are you going to learn? I say guys, sorry. I just mean the public in general. Order is important. I mean, I went to a wedding and somebody was like, "You're my best friend, my something, and my love." I'm like, shouldn't it be your love first and not your best friend? Like that, you know what I mean? It's like the order here is important. But you just had mentioned really quick, I know that you're so busy, especially with tomorrow, but so the laws have changed now in South Carolina where life without parole means life without parole. Is that right?
Correct. In other words, back then they called it life. They didn't say without parole because it wasn't without parole, but now life means life. So life here now is life without parole. You would not be eligible for parole.
Okay, got it. I had seen this case in Ohio where someone was convicted in the 70s and it was life. Somehow he had been up for parole a few times. And I was trying to figure this out. And it just seems like these are outdated laws from the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Well, and like I said, I just like truth in sentencing. I don't care, call it a 30-year charge if you're going to do it, but just call it what it is and be able to tell the jury. The irony was when the law changed the next year, the same people like David Bruck and then the defense attorneys who were saying, don't, you can't tell the jury that, parole eligibility, we're not supposed to speculate. It's funny, the next year when they made it, they darn sure wanted to tell the jury when you weren't going to be eligible for parole. So, it's a little bit of a lawyer game, I guess.
Yeah, right. Now, have you seen Susan in person since? No.
Not since the trial. I will tell you in the courtroom, I always share this with folks when they ask. Her demeanor when the jury wasn't present was a lot more light and flippant than when the jury was present. We tested the vehicle 6 minutes. I mean, it would take your breath away. It was an interior camera of how the vehicle, what Michael and Alex would have faced. It would take your breath away. She's in the courtroom. She can see the video. The jury's out. We're arguing it. She's giggling and scribbling over with the defense support staff. The jury comes back in. Now you're watching their face because, they're watching what you just seen.
Yeah.
Some of them are holding their breath. Some of them are crying. And of course, Susan's crying then.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
this just really validates all of my feelings. And honestly, her face and these mugshots validate my feelings half the time, and her actions. And the New York Post put out an article this morning saying that everyone that they've contacted about Susan, who she's had a relationship with, they've either not given a comment on her behalf. There supposedly is nobody that's going to speak on her behalf. And the one person they got in touch with heard her name and just goes, "Ugh," like that, and supposedly had this relationship with her.
Right. Right.
So yeah.
I think, I mean, honestly, I mean, in addition to the heinous nature of the crime, because, like David, we need to follow David's model and be forgiving, but she's also got to accept her responsibility. And however she's wired, the same thing that wired her to do this, the same thing that wired her to lie to us for 9 days, is wired to focus on Susan. And I think that's the undoing. It's like if you have a good friend and you hang out, but you always have to pay and you're always the one giving and she's always borrowing your stuff, after a while you part ways. And I think, anybody that said, had much time with Susan ends up parting ways.
Yeah, love that. Well, Tommy Pope, thank you so much for your insight. And thank you so much for being such an amazing justice warrior. Truly, this has been
Thank
such an eye-opening and validating conversation. You feel such a way for some of these convicted murderers, and sometimes you just want to feel like your hatred and your anger is okay, so I'll be watching you and praying for you and rooting for you tomorrow. So
I want you to pray for David Smith and his family. He's the one that, is really having to suffer through this. And I think he's been strong, but it's a burden. Thank you for having me. If you ever need me in the future, you now know how to get me.
yes, thank you so much, Tommy Pope. All of Tommy's information will be in the episode notes. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Because of that 9-line. And Ted Cruz says, look, if you're not into geopolitics,